hello and good afternoon. I hope everybody can hear me. And welcome to this session on the Open Strategic Autonomy, what's in it for SMEs. So my name is Kristin Schreiber. I will moderate this session. I'm director in DG GROW, in the European Commission, dealing with a number of ecosystems, with the chemical industry, with health, retail and agri-food, and very familiar in my ecosystems with the issue of open strategic autonomy, in particular in the area of health and chemicals. And I'm very happy to have this panel here. Let me just introduce the topic a little bit, and then I will introduce the panelists. So I think we've really seen in recent years some sort of paradigm shift from free trade, open market, globalized environment, to the current situation, which is marked by a lot of protectionism, by often mixing economic and political, military competition and issues, and most of all, by the very disruptive crisis we were facing with the pandemic, when we could all of a sudden see that we had completely disrupted supply chains. And this has led to often very big shortages, also in terms of raw materials, and we've seen inflation spiking. So I would say we're really facing a bit of a dilemma. On the one hand, we truly believe in open markets, and we depend very much on open markets for our export industries. But at the same time, we see a lot of that protectionism, interventionist policies by our major trading partners. And I think we have basically to develop a bit of a new industrial policy model, which maybe ceases to be naive, which continues to be open and pushing free trade, but at the same time taking into account strategic considerations, which means that we have to make sure that we actually know where we get our raw materials from. We have to have a look that when we have exclusive dependencies on important input, that we see whether we actually have access to what we call like-minded partners for this access. So in short, we are in the process of developing a policy of open strategic autonomy. And this is really based on a strategic assessment, identifying what kind of, in particular, raw materials we need to have access to, what can we do also in the context of our transition pathways for the different industrial ecosystems. You know that we have developed these pathways in order to make sure that to help companies to try to manage the green and digital transition, but increasingly in the course of the process it became clear that we have to help the sectors and the ecosystems to become resilient. And resilient is really much linked to this question of open strategic autonomy. And the reason why we have put this topic here in this session on the SME Assembly is really what's in it for SMEs, because SMEs have often been a bit of a missing link in this whole consideration. And we really want to discuss what kind of benefits actually SMEs, and especially of course our European SMEs, can draw from this strategic autonomy approach, and see how we can really make sure that SMEs are more taken into consideration. And I have to say I'm particularly happy to moderate this session because before this, my current position, I was for many years director for SME policy. So my heart is still beating for SMEs, and I think it's really very, very important that we focus on SMEs in the context of the strategic autonomy discussions. So my panel here today, I think, is very fitting for this topic. So the first speaker will be Ludger Odenthal, we used to work together for a long time, who is a senior policy officer in DG GROW, dealing, among others, with the legendary now already and well-established SME performance review. I'll just quickly introduce everyone. Then the second speaker will be Kármen Billo. Kármen, you are Chief of Cabinet in the State Secretariat for the Development of Small and Medium Enterprises and Technology in the Ministry for National Economy of Hungary. And then as a third speaker, we have Lucia Cusmano. We have also worked together already for a long time. Lucia, you are a senior economist and deputy head of the Entrepreneurship, SME and Tourism Division at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, Regions and Cities. It's almost as long a title as our DG Grow. And then, last but not least, we have Dirk Bergrath. You are head of the EU Liaison Office for IG Metall. And you're also a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, and so you have this very fitting double hat. Right, so now I will give the floor to the first speaker. We will have 5 minutes each, so we'll try to watch the time. Ludger, please share your insights on the needed policy shift to better integrate SMEs in our strategic open autonomy approach. Yes,
thank you, Kristin. Welcome. From my side, and I've assigned, like anyone else on this podium, 5 minutes. 5 minutes where, among other things, I want to present the key findings of this report called SMEs and Open Strategic Autonomy, an analysis we did sort of a bit less than a year ago. If you are interested in this topic, and of course I'm patting on my shoulder or a colleague's shoulders here, in the topic of how can you better involve SMEs in open strategic or combine these two issues, then this is your go-to Bible here. You know, seriously, we've tried to be very thorough in analyzing also by each of these what we call industrial ecosystems, 14 industrial ecosystems that essentially make up the whole economy, how open strategic autonomy, the concept, new industrial policy concept, will affect the industry and what are the potentials and the risk for SMEs in that. So there's a lot of detail in there, and it's possible in 5 minutes to sum that up. So I will be skating over very quickly about sort of the main principles on findings here, and I invite you to look into this document to, you know, if you want to have further detailed information. Well, first to start with, if we talk about the title here, what's in it for SMEs? I think it's important to, first of all, sort of acknowledge that SMEs, what the role is of SMEs play in industries. It's often reduced sort of intuitively to sort of a small, sort of, you know, a wheel in a whole machine, a supplier role, you know, which of course a lot of firms do. But SMEs play a way more important and diverse roles in industries as innovators, as the origin of innovations in industries, for instance. You know, and then of course as you know, not just sort of producers of input, but also producers of final outputs, and then of course ultimately also as clients of whatever a particular value chain produces. So it's a very diverse role they play, and in a different industrial policy context, that means there are lots of benefits for SMEs if the policies are designed appropriately. So the benefits are obviously that with bringing production back, with the ambition to produce more, to innovate more in Europe, there's enormous potential for SMEs, innovating SMEs, to participate in innovation, obviously. There is obviously, through the linkages, you know, if you bring back chip manufacturing and so on, then there are enormous potential for SMEs becoming, you know, key suppliers through linkages in the supply chain. And that, you know, that just to name some benefits. There are, of course, also risks, because this new industrial policy concept means that there might be retaliatory action. It might be more difficult for SMEs to export to other markets because other partners will close down their markets. There's also the risk that if we drive this policy concept to the extreme, and if we leave out the open from strategic autonomy, that there's too little competition, which I think SMEs, as business partners, as clients of larger firms often would stand to suffer. So these risks also have to be acknowledged, obviously. Now, in the report, we try, against this analysis, try to come up with sort of a very detailed policy action agenda. And again, it's way more detailed than I will present it here now. but let me just give you the main principles where you said, okay, so overall, I think what policymakers should do in order on the EU level and the national level to ensure that SMEs benefit to the max from this new industrial policy concept is, well, first of all, to keep two things in mind. One is, still, SMEs benefit a lot from trade openness. So even though we have to acknowledge, like Kristin said, we live in a new era where sort of a free market and global market, if it ever existed in that form, does not exist. So it's way more sort of a managed trade scenario. So that means still we want to as particularly in the Commission, we are in the driver's seat to ensure that the global trading regime is as open as possible. SMEs are one of the first who would benefit from that. And then also, of course, it's the role of SMEs as innovation. The Draghi report has highlighted the role of innovation as as crucial for Europe's economic future. And innovation is obviously something where SMEs can play a major role, should play a major role, and that also in this new industrial policy, we have to ensure that SMEs to the maximum are encouraged to innovate. We have, on that basis, we have 5 different policy areas mapped out, very detailed. I'll just give you the headlines and then I'll stop. So I think of the 5 policy sort of guardrails one should have kept in mind is that, yeah, R&D innovation key is number 1. So if we bring back more industries and try to foster industry here together with innovation, we have to ensure that it's easier for SMEs to participate in these programs. We have to make it simpler, to create a better overview of the programs as such, and also IPR, protection of intellectual property by small firms is a big issue. The traditional instruments like patents often are not that well suited for SMEs, so we have to think about other forms that SMEs can guard their innovations. Yeah? That's one. Then scaling up, very important. If you want to participate in value chains more than before, you have to be also, you stand a better chance the more your business is already developed. So scaling up, again, a theme of the Draghi report, is a key ingredient here also for helping SMEs to participate in the Open Strategic Autonomy. And there, of course, one homework we have to do is making the single market really scalable. We know, and it has been a theme already this morning, that the single market is not yet as single as it should be, and it's not as simple as it should be. And again, making this in many industries really removing obstacles it's first of all the SMEs which will benefit from that. Moving on the bolstering of the third issue, bolstering of domestic production and promotion of diversification. Again, we have highlighted a couple of very specific issues here, but here I think the question of really good linkages policies. You're talking a lot about open is key. We talk a lot about bringing back these sort of big prominent projects, big chip plants back to Europe and so on, which is fine. It's a challenging project often, as you can see, but I think often, and there are huge sums involved in promising to these firms, but you see very, very little or too less seriously a discussion on how can we then create the linkages to these big projects, to local firms, that they then also source whatever is needed for the semiconductors to the batteries locally or within the EU from suppliers. So, and there's a lot to learn. There's, for instance, the OECD did a study with Portugal on the linkages policies, and I think these examples, there's a lot of information around that would be useful to incentivize on the EU level to change, exchange that best practice. And to conclude, what's certainly important is also within the trade policy we have as the EU, there are already SME chapters in the trade agreements that the Commission track, but I think it's still sort of more an appendix than really, I think, a focus in trade negotiations and saying how can we have SMEs benefit to the maximum of these agreements. So that's also something to keep in mind. Final closing idea. This relationship, SMEs, Open Strategic Autonomy, is not a one-way street. It's not, I described now in length how SMEs can benefit more, but it's obviously works the other way around. It is hard to conceive how you can have more open strategic autonomy if you not strategically ensure that whatever investments you bring in are embedded in, in the local fabric of business, meaning create linkages for SMEs. So if you don't have SMEs participate in open strategic autonomy, there's a higher risk that the whole goal of the strategy might fail. Thank you very much. And I'm handing over to the next.
Yes, thank you very much, Ludger. I'm not going to ask a follow-up question because I gave you a little bit of extra time, but I think indeed this final point is very important because that brings us back to the resilience, because which is really I would say, the quid pro quo and the counterpart to the strategic autonomy. So, Lucia, you will now present a bit the work of the OECD on supply chains.
Yes. At the OECD, we have been looking, of course, at what's happening in the European Union at the supranational and national level, but also what's going on in other world regions, where I think there are very interesting insights, although these are agendas that are developing as we speak. What we see is, and it's no surprise, that the trends towards new industrial policy is really a global phenomenon. In some cases, I think it's a renaming of policies that have been there since a long while. And I'm referring in particular to Asia, that has always used a bit this strategic approach to opening and protecting as to develop national industries. But it's happening, I think, with renewed interest in these supply chain linkages, so taking a lot of supply chain or ecosystem perspective, and where, while there are differences across sectors, across supply chains, so I think this is something important to highlight when we look at the US, when we look at Korea, when we look at Japan or other major economies, there is a targeted approach depending on the industry or supply chains. So it's not one size fits all, which also tells that there is a lot of targeted intervention. We are, and Kristin, you said it, quite far already since a few years from the 80s approach that was much focused on let's make the business environment friendly and deregulate and things will happen and investment will come. So let me highlight maybe some of the commonalities that we have identified in these new industrial policies. One, I think, Ludger, you highlighted strongly, is it's a matter of building capacity. So it's not just protecting, but it's a lot about building the capacity to attract, to absorb, but also to participate to global markets and global value chain, where we may have there the trade-off, I agree, between a more of a protectionist stance, but on the other hand, the need to access knowledge network, to access technology. So boosting innovation and digitalization is common across. Where we see clearly difference with respect to the current European landscape is the size of investment. And I think that clearly the Inflation Reduction Act of the US is an example, a strong example in case, because it has been a massive, unprecedented intervention, much focus on clean tech, on decarbonization, but it is really at a scale that is hard, I think, to replicate for other major economies. And it's a lot of tax credit incentives, but also direct subsidies and grants R&D. With this aspect of making it easy for small businesses to access. So where there could be some interesting lessons also, I think, for European institutions in terms of how this could work, making it easy in the European context. Digitalization, of course. I'm referring back again to the US, because in their CHIPS Act, for example, I find it interesting that this focus is not only on the cutting edge, on the frontier, which of course is one of the priority, but also on helping what they call the legacy chip producers, small producer SMEs or designers, transition. So there is a lot of focus and money and grants and tax credits on transitioning and the focus on transition finance. Because I think we shouldn't forget that when in the US we talk about access to capital for innovating, there is also the private side of the market. So it's a trigger, it can be a trigger, but then there is also the access to this capital market that is much more fluid than in Europe. A second point is very targeted measure on strengthening supply chain linkages to reduce dependencies and to improve competitiveness, the development of skills, and we see that very clearly stated in Asia, for example, Japan and Korea, it's not just developing skills for the transition, it's also addressing labor shortages, demographic transition, demographic change. So something that is clearly also of interest to European economies. And where some of the programs on automation, robotization have such an explicit objective, somehow replace the labor force that is not there anymore, but that requires completely different business models to be run also at a small scale. And then another aspect that we see it's quite common across the major economies is the creation of data platform and space. Supply chain linkages, innovation, digitalization, it all revolves a lot about accessing, governing, managing data, and in connection across the supply chain. So the creation of data solutions that are ready to use, plug in for the small businesses is a strong focus. Where some countries have learned from some failures of the past, we see, for example, in Korea, they had a tradition of policies to create smart factories that didn't achieve the results that they were expecting, and partly because it was complicated in the end for a small business to participate. So they have built on this somehow failure to reformulate a policy where really the focus is on the data architecture. So the possibility of using data for small business, for optimization of production, for anticipating issues, problems in the supply chain. And let me just stress that maybe across all these priority areas that we see, there are some peculiarities that, again, could tell something also for the European action. One is focus on cooperation between large firms and SMEs. In Asia, they call it the win-win strategy. A strong call into action and responsibility by large businesses that they are a part in the game. And so in some cases, also with rather a top-down approach, they have to respond about the degree at which they are helping the suppliers, the type of action they put in place. In Korea, they even have a sort of scoring for large businesses, depending on the action they have taken for small suppliers. And this is taken into account for accessing other type of incentives or public procurement. So it's really quite of a strong type of policy. Cluster policies, so the spatial aspect has been particularly important. Again, with different emphasis, in Japan and Korea is very much about building mega clusters, like in the semiconductor, that could become world-class clusters, so nurturing a startup and scale-up that can become global leader. In the US, they also have the inclusiveness that has been integrated, so they have now quite of a large network of tech hubs, where 75% are located in rural areas or with underserved communities. So these attempt also to avoid the possible agglomeration effects that widen the existing divide. And then as a final point is also all these actions combining financial and non-financial support. So the access to advisory services, the access to peer learning, knowledge sharing as an essential component of these measures.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucia. And I'm just changing slightly my approach. I think I'll leave the questions for later because I mean, it has been very interesting because you both overran a bit. So I rather want to now give the floor to the next speaker, which is Dirk. And you will bring in especially the trade union perspective, I presume, and with your different hats. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, first of all, and also thanks a lot for the organizers of this SME Assembly for the first part. It has been a very inspiring session both yesterday and in the morning, I have to admit. And yes, I'm invited here a bit in my double role as a member of the Economic and Social Committee, an advisory body that brings together employers, workers, and other parts of organized civil society, and representative of IG Metall, the German Metal Workers Federation. Those of you not familiar that much with the German context, in the European, we are the largest member of Industry All Europe. Might be a word for the Hungarian audience. Vasas is our corresponding main partner here in Hungary. To bring in a bit the perspective of the automotive industry, and at a glance, we're talking about in Europe 3.5 million people working in the sector in the case of manufacturing, which is a mixture of larger companies and SMEs, and 4.5 million when we're looking at sales and maintenance, which is also a sometimes neglected aspect, which is dominated by SMEs. When we look at the main challenges from our point of view, we see at least two. First is that the export-led growth model, especially of the German car makers towards China, is coming to an end. Obviously, we have the strategy made in China for China. We will have like a spillover also from Chinese imports. We currently estimate that the Chinese produce about 15 million units of vehicles per year, having an internal demand of 8 million, so that leaves a gap of 7 million that need to go somewhere in the world, and obviously Europe is of a main destination. The other one is the shift in the powertrain from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle. We see that in the old world of the dominance of the combustion engine, Europe was able to provide more or less all of the value chain in the automotive sector. So everything connected to this was more or less produced within the European Union, plus East Europe, Southeast Europe, plus the Southern Mediterranean. That reflected very much of it. We have been the technology leader there, also the leader in efficient production of cars, and we had a very strong interlinkage between the large-size enterprises and the small and medium-sized enterprises. We face in the new world some technology challenges. We see that leadership is outside the European Union. This is very much true for the case of the battery, which is utmost important in the value chain of producing EVs. We also see it in the question of software that comes more and more important. The idea is of that the software-defined vehicle and all the question of autonomous driving, but also in the question of production processes. Inventions like the megacasting, gigacasting coming from Tesla is of course a bit challenging. So unlike other industries where we talk about reshoring, when we talk about open strategic autonomy, I would say that in the automotive sector we talk more about the technology catch-up or capacity building that we have to face here in the question of the activities. And take the example of the batteries, we have there also a mixture of legacy OEMs that are heavily involved in there, Stellantis, Volkswagen, others. We have some kind of newcomers coming in, the Chinese foreign direct investment, Tesla also foreign direct investment announced with big difficulties, and a series of startups like Northvolt being involved in the sector. Also due to and we had from the Minister of National Economy this morning an input on this question on the uptake of the EVs. So what is, from our point of view, the role especially of SMEs in this perspective? I think first of one is the question of having access to finance to organize properly the innovation. We see a lot of companies, especially in the tier 2 and tier 3 sectors, that are like world leaders in their niches, but strongly with their products connected to the world of the combustion engine. And there you really need a kind of a perspective. How does my company can fit into this new world? And there it's a question of access to financing this, and also sometimes a bit of an assistance to reinvent for that. And the second aspect for the whole of the sector in this question, I think, is the question of skills that we talked about. And here I would also draw some of the conclusions we had yesterday in the speech for the Schumpeter Prize, that we should not only look at what we call the STEAM sector when talking about the skills. I think the comparative advantage of Europe in all of the industry, and maybe especially on the automotive, is that we have a rather broad qualification, that we have a special focus on vocational and educational training, and that differs very much. So we're not competing on low wages, and we're not competing only on the end of STEAM, but we have to bring it in the broader sense. And this, I think, also for the SMEs can be like the comparative advantage that you find, that you have the workforce at hand that finds quickly practical solution to solve problems. And I think this is something where Europe can still be unique, but we have to organize this transfer of skills. And there, obviously, already in the larger scale companies, you do face difficulties to organize that internally, but for SMEs that might be impossible to do. And I think so this is the major task. First of all, do some kind of a mapping exercise, where is also regionally the opportunities ahead, and then with the involvement of also the social partners, invest into this skills meeting. And that, I think, would be the first input.
Thank you very much, Dirk. And now we are coming to the last but not least, the final speaker on the panel. Kármen, you will expose a little bit of perspective from a member state, and obviously not any member state, but the one who is hosting us here and who has currently the presidency. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Do you have a presenter for the...
I think
that one, I guess.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome all of you on behalf of the presidency. Yes, I was asked to showcase our practices, our best practices, and how we are going forward with this topic. And I would like to thank you for the report. It was an excellent report, and we've been using it for some time. It's a very useful one. And I would not like to repeat the minister who spoke earlier this morning, and just let me demonstrate these graphs for you, how China is outranking Europe in many aspects on the Global Innovation Index, or the number of patent applications inland, but also globally they are on a global podium, let's say. And some European countries can actually keep up with this in this competition. Unfortunately, Hungary not at the moment, so we have a lot to do, and with my colleagues we are trying to move forward. At the same time, with another global outlook, there are less and less European companies in the top 100 companies in the world. And this we must keep in mind, because less and less large companies can make it to this top list. So we need to think about scaling up SMEs and how they can become first medium-sized enterprises, then large enterprises, multinational enterprises, and what incentives we can find also in the European Union and nationally to support these companies so they can make it in the biggest companies worldwide. Also, I would not like to repeat the minister. Sorry, I was preparing these slides before I saw his presentation. I only received his presentation last night. But of course, we cannot leave out the results of the Hungarian presidency, the new competitiveness deal, and as you said, investing in skills and finding new sectors like biotech, new technologies, AI, space industry, and also stabilizing agriculture is key in fostering the open strategic autonomy. Now let's focus on the member state perspective. We have an industrial strategy, which is called Competitiveness Strategy, which was published this spring. And the main elements are, we call it patriotism, it also can be called protectionist economy or domestic production, technology, sustainability, supply security, and in the focus there is the development of artificial intelligence and electromobility, which are horizontal key factors. And the main question is, probably in this panel today, what company incentives we can find. So how can we lure them back to continue or start production back in Europe? What's in the balance for reshoring? Because before the pandemic, we must admit that moving supply chains to remote areas was to maximize profits, and the pandemic and the war hit them very hard, so they could feel the pain that the supply chain disruption, the shortage of raw materials, the energy prices went up, so they could really feel this on their skin, but we know that large companies forget these very quickly, and they come to go back to the board decisions and let's make the profit again, and what can be put on the other half of the scale, how can we, what kind of incentives we can come up with. So we must show them alternatives. Is security, supply chain security, is it enough? As you said, probably how we can make them more diverse, and how we can say that they need the supply chains in Europe, and we must show them these with either grants and can we provide grants to large companies. So STEP was very welcomed by our member state, that it's a very good initiative by the Commission, and we are working to elaborate new projects for the STEP initiative, and we are also asking the European Commission, as you are here, to speed up the process, the administrative process, so we can incorporate the STEP priority in our programs as soon as possible. But to be honest, there are not enough large companies, as I have mentioned, and so we need to scale up SMEs, as you have said. And I very much agree with you, as you have mentioned, Lucia, that targeted actions are necessary. And if we see and also scaling up, we look at the number of medium-sized enterprises. This is probably a Hungarian problem, and I'm bringing this before you because I need to demonstrate the member state perspective, that Hungary only has 5,000 middle-sized companies. So that's a very low number, and actually this number, 5,000, it's not been changing for the past 20 years. And in Germany, it's 2%. In Hungary, it's only 0.5% of the SMEs that are medium-sized enterprises. We are also below the EU average. So we need to bring up new actions to try to improve this number. And what are we doing to introduce targeted actions? We have about 900,000 SMEs, but most of them, almost about 620,000 of them, are either with 0 employees or only 1 employee. So they are the smallest micro-enterprises. It's not them, actually, the self-employed. It's not them we can build the new industrial plan on, of course. So there are about 40,000 SMEs that are over the small size. And we can actually target those enterprises that we can find them name by name. For example, there are 3,500 manufacturing suppliers outside of Budapest. Why am I saying this? Because those that are in the developing regions that can be targeted with grants and support. And about 1,600 metalworking SMEs. So we know in every sector how many companies are, in what size, in what region. And with this targeted approach, we can try to convince them to invest more with our programs. So what kind of programs are we using? Of course, as you have mentioned, we need to make them more resilient, and they need to be more diverse. Also in the products that they produce, they need to innovate more products, and also they need to find more buyers, so they are diverse and they are not hit so badly by global economic changes. The automotive industry at the moment has a very negative effect on the Hungarian industry at the moment, and the suppliers as well. So we are working on transitional planning, but let's keep in mind that a transitional period for a company, for example, from an automotive industry to a defense industry, is a very difficult transition, because the standards that they have to comply with in the automotive industry is extremely difficult to comply those. But in defense industry, it's even worse. It takes years and years to comply standards in the defense industry. So we need to help them either financially and also with consultancy. Fortunately, we have the National Development Agency and other background institutions, foundation, chamber, that can provide consulting and support to these SMEs. We are using much of the structural funds to provide these services. Also, let's not forget that they are facing the ESG preparation this year and the next year. And can we expect companies outside Europe to be excluded from the supply chains because of the ESG? That's a question, and maybe I'm not supposed to ask the questions today, but we'll see. But we are also using a targeted preparation in this field. We are asking the large companies to involve their suppliers one by one to prepare them for these requirements. And also, they are, at the moment, Hungarian SMEs and mid-sized companies are reluctant to invest more because of the insecurities, especially in the automotive industry. So we are coming up with new grants, subsidized loans, guarantee programs, and venture capital programs practically month by month to lure them into investing more and find this way forward. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we've covered a lot of different ground with the 4 panelists. I would have some follow-up questions, but I would first like to, because I'm patiently listening, to give you the opportunity to ask questions. We also have a possibility on Slido, where you see the hashtag. And so I suppose we can take both questions from the room and questions from Slido, which I presume will appear on my screen. So I'm just already looking around if somebody has a question here. Okay, so I hope we have a mic somewhere. Yeah, so the gentleman with the orange jumper, easy to find.
Thank you. Okay, I come from the German VGSD, what means Association for Small and Medium, Very Small Companies, and we try to make some politically heard. I have the question to Ludger and you. You were talking about linkage to the possibilities that are offered. And you were talking about databases that should be opened. Are you both speaking about the same issue? Is it the same point actually, that small and medium companies should have easier access to what is happening, to chances that are opened? Is this the same point, and how could this really happen? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, maybe I think the question was directed to both of us, so I'll make a start and maybe then I hand over to you. Yeah, no, well, I think the platform issue, as I understand, is maybe a bit separate, not identical to the question of linkages. Linkages simply, I mean, it's the fact that, you know, if you have now, for instance, a Chinese car manufacturer coming into Europe and building cars here, you know, that per se can be an opportunity. You know, it's of course competition, but it can be an opportunity, but only to the extent that you ensure that that manufacturer also sources as many input and value added locally in the EU, and that the investment is not a front to basically wholesale import, basically, you know, the car to Europe, and just it's just the assembly which will take place, you know, in Europe. So and it sounds trivial in a way, but often I think with FDI projects, I think there is not too much attention imposed on that, and maybe also national governments, in particular in the EU, may feel that they played against each other and hesitate maybe to insist on saying, well, you can have the investment here, you can have certain benefits, but we also have to, you know, source locally. I can see there's a difficulty, probably, if you can probably speak better to that, if an investor approaches you and says, I want to invest here. But I think that certainly is something that everyone in the EU has to be aware of, that, you know, nobody benefits from investments that come in that which doesn't create these linkages and which are not basically, you know, somewhat then eventually are grounded in the EU, which are basically, you know, footloose investments, as you would speak. So that's one thing. The platform issue is, I think, something which is also more related to data, right?
Yes.
Maybe you want to speak to that.
I was referring, in fact, to the data framework architecture that are developed across supply chain, and where we see that there are industrial programs, for example, in Germany, that push a lot for enabling SME access to this type of data architecture that may be used to control flows across the supply chain, to have immediate reaction to some issues along the supply chain, to anticipate, for example, if it's a matter of a manufacturing production, anticipating where defects may come from, etc. And also gives an element of traceability to the large enterprises, but also to the SMEs that are participating. Where, of course, a big question is capacity of the small business to actually enter into this system and being able to protect data, access those data, use it for their own decision, because we know also that there is a question of security, and that when the small business becomes the weak link, then there is a barrier to actually enter the supply chain that is governed through this data architecture. So it was referring to that aspect.
Easy API, what means connection,
Yeah.
really plugged in spot.
Yeah.
So it's easily accessible. API, that's what it's all about. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I take, maybe I'll collect 2 questions from the room, and then we can also have you over here.
Hello, Anna Klisouras. I'm owner of a consultancy with the same name. I have a question, and particularly to Mr. Odenthal and Ms. Cusmano. I got the feeling that the terms autonomy and innovation were sometimes used interchangeably. It might have been me. My question is, where do you draw the line between these areas, and how do you see the balance that should be given in terms of policy focus on either of those? And the reason I'm asking this, because I think it's 2 very separate areas that require different policy instruments. That would be at least my intuition, while autonomy would be more focused on, let's say, copy-pasting existing innovation in AI or cloud, etc., and bringing it to Europe. The other one, in my perception, would be more open-ended and more focused on facilitating or seeding the seed, so to say. So I would be very interested in your perspective on this. Thanks.
Do we have another question from the room which fits a bit with that one? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Baptiste Després from Seplis. A bit following on this question, we talked a lot about innovation, about investing, subsidies, grants, and all of that. On the other side, strategic autonomy, at least to some people, is understood as protectionism, as you briefly mentioned. And when we talk about SMEs innovating, we also see a lot in Europe of those startups, of those SMEs being either eaten by foreign big multinationals or being not able to compete and be competitive fast enough to survive. And so, along with this innovations policy, would you recommend something on, well, protectionist policy and on protecting those infant industries and those innovative SMEs? For example, in the battery sectors, we talked in China, there's an over-dominance of China in battery industries. For Europe, how do you deal with that? How do you allow those European companies to scale up and to have the time to be competitive? Thank you.
Okay, very good, very complex question. So, and given the time, I think it's impossible to really give them due justice. I'll just, very quickly, I think it's right to say absolutely that, let's say, ensuring autonomy in the sense of bringing back production capacity, so you're less dependent on things outside, is a bit different than the innovative aspect. That's true. And of course, the Open Strategic Autonomy tries, in my understanding, to do both. Yes, we want to ensure, against the backdrop of the lessons of the recent crisis, to ensure, okay, we do not face those disruptions anymore. So part of the strategy means simply to have production capacity closer to home, so that reduces the risk of these. But then I think, obviously, that alone would be sort of a rather sort of, would not do justice to the competitive challenge that the EU faces. But if you bring production home, then you also have to seize, and that I think is the other side of this strategy, because once you have production in a place, it can inspire innovation. Then you have a semiconductor operation and production in sort of on your doorstep. That can inspire new linkages and ideas by potential supplier firms or others, and saying, look, can't we do it this way or that way? And yes, so that requires 2 different sets of policy instruments. So yeah, that would be a long discussion how to do this or the other. But it's true these two things are separate. The other question, but I don't know if you want, because again those were directed to the two of us. Maybe at least to answer one part of the question, you said, there's a challenge that European innovative firms are basically in the sort of taken up once they're proven to be really valuable, proven up to be taken up, bought over, merged, M&A-wise, taken over by firms from outside, from China. That's a real danger, obviously. That's the whole discussion that we have with Europe startups. I don't think the answer is to completely rule this out. I think what it really means is that we have to make really fast and way more attractive to ensure that those firms that are so attractive, that they don't need to resort to capital coming from elsewhere, that the options are here to source the capital that they need to grow. I know this sounds simple, but I think this is the only answer. I don't see, yes, we have investment screening and so on to some extent, you will always have that. But to shield completely firms from being, taken over from outside, I don't think that's the answer. It's just more a call for us to being, as per the Draghi report, much faster to build up a European capital market union, so that there are more options available than selling out your firm to Silicon Valley or to elsewhere.
Lucia, a quick compliment, because then I still want to quickly pick up on those.
Yeah, I think Ludger said it. I think it's a blurred difference. So sometimes it's more around, let's say, the narrative can change, but I see that there is this very close relation sometimes between autonomy and protectionism. I'm not sure it's a copy and paste, although there is the risk that there is reinventing the wheel simply because we need to have our own will. The discussion on artificial intelligence that is ongoing, to me, it's very telling. Should Europe rely on artificial intelligence frameworks, languages developed elsewhere? Or should Europe make up its own one? And what does it mean in terms of capacity to invest? Is there a capacity? And convenience. Are there opportunities, for example, to rather leapfrog in the next wave? Or what are the risks if it's entirely dependent on frameworks that are developed elsewhere? Not that I have anywhere the answer at all, but I think it's, at least this is not in terms of protectionism, it's really also in terms of capacity and convenience, because there are issues related with, needless to say, security as well. If you do a text analysis of the documents related to industrial policy in the US and in Europe, it's very interesting. In the US, the most used term is security. In Europe is regulation.
Thanks.
Which maybe is a way to secure, I don't know.
So we're almost running out of time. I would just like to pick up here. There's one question on Slido. Shall we actually stop Chinese electric vehicle imports or instead try to integrate into this brand new value chain? That's the whole issue. Can you actually integrate into these value chains? But maybe I'll give that to Dirk.
From my point of view, we should invite manufacturers from outside the European Union to produce in the European Union. And the example has been given. The Americans, I come from the area close to Cologne. In Cologne, you have a Ford factory since the 1920s. Already, we had the same effect with the Japanese. But what is crucial, I think, that we insist on questions of local content, so that we do not end up into the final assembly production where most of the value added is being done outside the European Union, and where we have the skills, where we have the suppliers on board within Europe, which reflects also to SMEs, and where we have obviously also skilled labor on board. And I think this also applies a little bit to the infant industry argument. I think which is a key issue is how can we guarantee that this grow up of the industry happens, where I see instruments like the IPCEIs as a role, but also obviously to ensure local content, the role of public procurement, with the time limitations that we have, just to pop in these words.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And I think we have many questions we could discuss. I'll skip the defense industry one because there was a dedicated session on defense actually, and I don't think none of us here is a real true expert on defense. So in order to bring this, I think, really interesting session to a close, thank you very much to all the panelists. I think we had very interesting insights. I think in particular, this whole aspect also, I would say, in cooperation, large and small, which you mentioned, which is something we have already been addressing a long time. I think this is also crucial if we want to keep innovation in Europe, and then this whole other aspect on transition and skills, because we see this issue at the moment that on the one hand we have a skills shortage, on the other hand we see tense employment situation in many areas. So I think this is also, very important for the strategic autonomy, and I would say as a follow-up, maybe also then for the next assembly, that we can decline this maybe in particular sectors, and I see how this resilience and strategic autonomy looks like in different sectors and what one can learn from sectors which have integrated SMEs better in these supply chains than others. So I would say that would be a nice contribution at next year's assembly. So thank you very much for your attention, both here in the room and online, and I release everyone either to a coffee break, or if you were very motivated, and I would very much encourage you to do that, there are these Meet the Expert sessions. I did one myself over lunchtime beforehand, and there is one now on the Single Digital Gateway. You have to trek up the stairs. You will find it there, so I encourage you to actually listen in. That's starting now. Thank you.